We all know the capacity of a FAT16 MS-DOS formatted floppy disk. 1.44 megabytes for a high density and 720 kilobytes for double density, for 3.5 floppies at least. It's possible to squeeze more out of them with specialist formatting tools and the like, but these are the standard capacities we all know and love? So what if I told you that I could fit 120 megabytes or even 240 megabytes of data onto this 3.5-inch floppy disk? Look, it even fits in a standard floppy drive. Well, you've got the remainder of this video to pick your jaws up off the floor, because that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about. This is the Maxell LS120 SuperDisk drive. To be more precise, it's the box for a Maxell LS120 SuperDisk drive, with the LS standing for laser servo, but its contents transforms the humble floppy into something, well, more useful. Something which allows you to plug and save. Look at all that digital media on the back. Let's get into the box first, and then we can discuss in more detail. So we've got drivers for all the operating systems I care about, always handy. Inside there's a manual, a couple of those magic 120 megabyte disks, a parallel connection cable, power adapter, a set of non-magical standard high-density disks, and the SuperDisk drive itself. The case looks like it's popped open a bit, but that shouldn't affect operation. Now you can have this thing lay flat on your desk or use this plastic mount for vertical positioning. I think we'll go for some vertical action today, conserve some desk space for additional clutter. So, each of these discs has its own plastic case, but otherwise it's almost identical to a standard 3.5-inch floppy. We've got space for a label, a write protect notch, even the access cover which snaps back into place. Sure, the design is different to differentiate it, but otherwise it's a 3.5-inch disc, it even weighs the same. Lots of lovely information in the manual about setting up and whatnot, but let's just dive straight in. I'm going to be using my Amstrad Integra with Windows 98 to kick things off. The cable plugs straight into the parallel port, providing a pass-through if you had a printer connected as well. This then plugs into the SuperDisk drive using a connector reminiscent of a joystick socket. Power cord in the top and we are good to go. We get a green access light on power up and a reassuring sound. So let's install some drivers. Whilst that's installing and rebooting, let's cover some history. Now, the original SuperDisk hardware was designed by 3M under the Imation brand, who in 1997 licensed the technology out to companies such as Matsushita and Mitsubishi, whilst also sold under the Maxell brand. Rather appropriate for 3M to find three companies beginning with the letter M. The design stemmed from a project at Iomega using lasers to guide a magnetic head, allowing for much greater precision than in mechanical floppy drives. This is known as Floptical technology, and serves as one of the last products to really use it. Of course, Iomega had pretty much abandoned the project when they released their own super floppy incarnation, the zip drive, in 1994. And so the SuperDisk was starting on a back foot. The world needed a replacement for the 3.5-inch floppy, and this is what 3M and its licensees hoped the SuperDisk would serve as. Now, you might notice that the Windows 98 boot screen has been here for quite a while, and that's because it's crashed. If we dig into the Windows Device Manager, we can see that the device halted Windows and therefore it will never ever be started again. That's quite a firm commitment from an operating system. Isn't it here to serve me rather than the other way round? The SuperDisk control panel tells us that the driver isn't loaded, so clearly something has gone terribly wrong. My first port of call was to remove these zip disk drivers, but that did nothing. Neither did changing the parallel port communication type, or removing and reinstalling. It could be any number of things, so rather than dick about, I brought in my trusty compact Presario for some classic DOS 6.22 and Windows 3.11 testing instead. Luckily, we have all the drivers for all these eventualities. And check out that DOS installation program. Isn't it just erotic almost? A quick reboot and yes, we can see the drivers initializing here. Success. We have our SuperDisk drive set up as drive D. Now all we need to do is navigate to it and voila, a 120 megabyte floppy drive at our disposal. Marvellous stuff. Our old friend CheckDisk returns 125,958,144 bytes of total disk space. So we actually get 125 megabytes on these things, formatted as DOS. Not sure why they don't advertise it as that, opting to use mebibytes instead. I mean, we're talking over 3 additional floppies here. But anyway, the far more visually stimulating ScanDisk runs pretty quick, but actually reports the drive's backup FAT as being inconsistent. But worry not, let us boot into Windows and chuck some files about. As we're using Windows 3.11, no additional drivers are necessary. Although, if you're that way inclined, you can install the supplied double zip software, allowing up to a whopping 240 megabytes on each disk, much like drive space or the more troublesome double space supplied with DOS. However, it wouldn't boot in my version of Windows, so onward. Now, I thought I'd attempt copying a cover disk CD onto the SuperDisk. The manual tells us that it can achieve a continuous transfer rate of 270 kilobytes per second, several times faster than a standard floppy drive. But it didn't take long for further problems to set in. Now, this unit is clearly getting old and so it probably has alignment issues, but it only managed to copy some 5 megabytes, along with a plethora of lost allocation units before crashing Windows. Attempts to format each of these SuperDisks with the bundled format utility also failed, which is a shame, but aligns with the success of the hardware on its release. The SuperDisk wasn't the floppy disk replacement its manufacturers hoped it to be. Given the larger zip disks and drives had been out for several years already, it had established itself in the niche of that market, whilst the other part was being served by CD-ROM or even writable CD drives if you were fortunate enough. Whilst the SuperDisk had the ability to read and write standard floppy disks, or in the case of my drive, fail to read them, it's not like it worked the other way around, and even if you installed a drive internally via IDE or SCSI, you'd still likely need to retain your standard drive connected to a floppy interface, acting as the all-important A drive. Although Windows XP would later have the ability to see a SuperDisk drive as an A drive. The SuperDisk was faster than the floppy, but even the Zip 100 drive could shift data at about 1.4 megabytes per second, although real-world parallel connections were a lot slower. Zip drives were more established, about the same price, and also seemed to be a bit more dependable, with many complaining about the fragility and reliability issues of the SuperDisk medium, although zip disks definitely had their fair share of problems. A common issue when pushing portable storage to the limits, as we've witnessed today. But SuperDisk fought on with the 240 model released in 2001, developed by Matsushita, featuring a spangled USB connection and even allowing you to store up to 32 megabytes on a standard floppy disk, although it needed to rewrite the entire disk each time you changed something. But this was also the same year as the Zip 250 drive appeared, which was superseded only a year later by the much faster Zip 750 drive. So although it had some great intentions, SuperDisk it seems was relegated to a distant memory of Floptical media, whilst Zip struggled on before being relegated by the almighty USB drive. But that's not to say it's not fondly remembered. The medium found its way onto various Panasonic digital cameras and MIDI keyboards, where it provided much needed storage capacity without requiring any more physical space than a floppy drive, an achievement which shouldn't be devalued and a reason to admire the SuperDisk in a nostalgic blaze of withered glory. I'll leave you with the beautiful process of applying a fresh label to one of the floppy disks. You can't beat fresh labels. Thanks for watching this video on the SuperDisk. There's some other videos that might interest you here. You can support me through Patreon or subscribe or give the video a thumbs up or down, it all helps. Anyway, thanks for watching and have a great evening.